Welcome to Channel 24. Stanislav Belkovsky, political analyst and writer, is joining me now to the studio. Stanislav, long time no see.
Thank you for an invitation again. Hello.
So, Stanislav, President Donald Trump keeps making bold and sometimes surprising statements that shock the world and especially the Ukrainian audience. Speaking at Quantico in Virginia in front of U.S. generals, he said he is disappointed with Russian dictator Putin and even mocked him for dragging out the war in Ukraine for 4 years. Well, is that a serious statement, or is just we see a person who was offended by Putin, by his arrogance and ignoring American president?
Putin has never been arrogant nor ignoring American president, and he expressed his full readiness to come to some kind of pact with Donald Trump involving huge Russian natural resources and some investment programs in Arctic. But Trump is disappointed by his own inability to stop the war in Ukraine. The big war in Europe is looking for some ways out, how to explain it to the world, to his constituents, to American and global elites, and first and foremost to himself. And the new sayings of Donald Trump reflect his lack of understanding why such a huge power like Russia, exceeding Ukraine in different resources several times, cannot cope with Ukraine fighting for its freedom and for its independence. This is some kind of misunderstanding between Trump and the march of history, I would say. Mm-hmm. So Trump explained in Virginia why and in what way he's really disappointed at Putin. Because I think that Putin promised to Trump that he would defeat Ukraine. Russian forces could defeat Ukrainian forces in military way for several months. For the first time, it was discussed, I think, almost a year ago in November, after Trump's victory at America's general election. And then in Alaska, on the 15th, 16th of August, Putin may proclaim that Ukrainian forces will be defeated in 2-3 months. So Putin promised that he would lead Ukraine to some kind of semi-capitulation, which would deprive Donald Trump of necessity to seek the pretext for the further negotiations with Kremlin on the questions of natural resources, Arctic, and so on. But nothing happened since. Of course, Russia has several advantages on the fronts, but we don't observe any dramatic breakthrough for Russia. But we'll still see this position war, which could last for ages. Of course, with innumerable victims, with vast damage, first and foremost from Ukraine, but still, Russia has not proved its ability to win this war shortly. And that's the very thing that Trump is very bitterly disappointed with.
Yeah, but how do you assess all this meeting actually in Quantico, with Trump and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth all together, and Hegseth spoke about the warrior ethos and shifting focus to the homeland and the Western Hemisphere. Is this, Stanislav, is this unusual? I was reading that usually these meetings are not happening with that numbers of people offline. Usually they joining online, partially offline, something, but not on that huge scale.
Donald Trump has ever been successful showman, first and foremost. Yes, even being a businessman, we cannot maintain he had been very successful as developer. And not in vain, 6 companies of him has underwent bankruptcy procedures at different times, at different time periods. But as showman, Trump has been undoubtedly successful for all of his career. And all his development projects have been some kind of show, his political career and political steps as well. It was a specific show to demonstrate the new aesthetical, I would say, approaches of American president and his war minister, now not defense, but war minister, Peter Hegseth, to what should be considered as American army, American troops, and American readiness for wars. It was to a certain extent ridiculous, in my opinion, because some questions were discussed having nothing to do with the modern conception of war and modern understanding on how and in what way the huge superpower should be ready for global military conflicts or local ones. Pete Hegseth concentrated his attention on the questions of births and the weight of the military persons, rather than strategic or tactical concepts. Nothing can be said about America's unions with former existing or future allies, and so on and so forth. So it was just, it reminded me of Miss Universe, some competition owned by Donald Trump formerly, but American soldier as a Mr. Universe. It was presented in some way alike. So we didn't hear, we hear nothing connected with the real military problems and strategies of this very day. But of course, Donald Trump represents to a very considerable extent the isolationists, the constituents, the politicians, the intellectuals gathered at MAGA camp, who are fully convinced that America should not interfere with any huge problems far from its borders. America should concentrate on itself and internal conflicts, or at least conflicts very close to its borders. That's the basic idea of MAGA isolationism, called America First, which does not mean America should be a global leader. On the contrary, America First means that America should deprive itself of any responsibility, any liabilities connected with world stability and security. And this, including this doubtful show in Virginia, reflects the new world, which is no more America-centered world. It's a network world, where different countries, unions, and allies could be, all the unions could be tactical only and dedicated to the solution of concrete tactical problems. This hierarchy of the American Central world does not exist anymore.
Yeah, so, and do you think most of Americans agree with that attitude?
I cannot estimate it in figures. Mm-hmm. It would depend on how America could save its face with regard to different conflicts in different parts of the world. Don't forget that in 9 days, on the 10th of October, Trump, everybody expects this Nobel Prize, Norwegian Nobel Committee decision on the Nobel Prize of this year. And that was also the important topic for Donald Trump at this Virginia gatherings. He emphasized that he's expecting this Nobel Prize. He evaluates it, he appreciates it as an award to America and American people, not just to himself personally. And if he's not granted Nobel Prize, so he would be very offended. And this could lead, at least it was at the level of hands, but it was emphasized at the level of hands. This would lead to several conflicts and tensions in his relationship with several partners, including Norway. The word Norway has not been called at this meeting in Virginia, but nonetheless. And so Trump, of course, is very interested in bringing peace to the Middle East and in the further development of Abraham Accords. And here we see the contradiction between him and Israeli Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu, who is more interested in war and in postponement of further development of Abraham Accords, because it could help him to keep power on the general elections in the next year and furthermore. So there are numerous contradictions, and Trump not in vain does remind us that he has stopped 8 wars, already 8. We don't know what does he mean and where those 8 wars there are, but the only thing we can be quite sure about, he has not stopped the war in Europe. And for him, there are 2 ways out: to change his strategy towards a big war in Ukraine, a big war in Europe, and find the new ways how to press onto Vladimir Putin as the key force and the key subject, not interested in bringing peace now. Or secondly, just to drive his attention away from it and create the impression that it's a problem of Europe, not himself, and just inspiring in some ways as a joke, Ukraine and America to fight Russia to the utmost, to come to the borders of 1991 and further to the Urals. But I'm not hopeful that with regard to this war in Europe, Trump is going to be isolationist because he's not successful in putting stop to it, as he promised before the elections and before his inauguration. We remember those 24 hours, 100 days, the big armistice at the Easter Day on the 20th of April, nothing happened. And so because Trump does not recognize his mistakes on one hand, and on another hand, he does still want to come to some pact with Putin in some midterm future. So for him, the best way is to try to forget about it and to put this burden, to hand this burden fully over to Europe. Now facing the real prospect of big war with Russia.
Yeah, I'm just while you saying that, I'm recalling his one of the latest posts on Truth Social, when Donald Trump said, "Good luck to you all," and I'm thinking always, what should allies do with that? Good luck to you all. What they should do with that? How they should react on that?
The allies should understand that there is no more hope in America. Realize fully, of course, with one hemisphere of the brain, European elites do understand this, that there is no more America-centered world, there's no more America's world, and America is no more guarantor of global and European security. But with by the second hemisphere of the brain, Europe is still hopeful that maybe this brave old world could get back. And America would regain its competences and its willingness to protect the post-Second World War allies, first and foremost Europe. But I think there is no ground nor basic reasons for such hopes. Europe should learn to do and act without America, to do and act on its own, understanding that the war in Europe is the third stage of the big war between Russia and Europe. Nobody can say what would Putin do if he's a winner in Ukraine after accumulating and mobilizing all the resources in the next stage and his willingness to defeat Europe and to show that European political humanitarian model is no more efficient and totalitarianism of Russian kind is the future of the humanity. For Putin is to a certain extent important. Though Putin, of course, is a businessman by his basic mentality, and as a businessman, he evaluates his resources. As we discussed it several times, he would never launch the big war with Ukraine if he realized how painful it would be for him and how much Russian resources it would require. He was hopeful about so blitz war in Kiev for 3 days, Ukraine for 2 weeks. And of course, he did never expect such a war, which is as much long as the Second World War for Soviet Union. I remember it lasted for the Soviet Union 1,418 days. Ukrainian war now more than 1,300 days. Of course, psychologically, it's rather painful for a Russian dictator. Though all this does not mean that he would launch any large and full-scale war against Europe tomorrow. But the hybrid war is already on the table. All those drones in different countries of Europe, at airports, of the objects of critical infrastructures, some strange planes, and so on. All this as a hybrid war against Europe has started, and not now, in 2014. And annexation of Crimea, and the start of the war in Donbass were the first stages, first acts of this drama, which Europe has and America have bitterly underestimated then. Let's be hopeful they would not underestimate it now.
Yeah, Stanislav, as you said in one of your latest interviews, that Putin is already psychologically ready for the war in Europe, but he cannot do that practically, physically, I don't know, not capable of that.
Yeah, not capable because he doesn't have enough resources for that.
Yeah.
Now he's fully concentrated on war with Ukraine, and all the Putin's resources, military, financial resources, and so on and so forth, are directed to Ukraine and the Ukraine war. But in coming years, in 2 and 3 years, maybe Putin would prepare himself for the new stage of war. Of course, if Ukraine is defeated. If not, he would be 100% concentrated on Ukraine, because for him it's a primary goal. And even in the situation of long-term armistice, Putin would never abandon his attempts to change power in Kyiv and bring to power the pro-Kremlin government. So repeating in some elements, some aspects, Chechen and Georgian scenarios, which proved very successful to him. War first, pro-Kremlin government second, as it's been in Chechnya, in Grozny, and in Tbilisi. Nobody expected pro-Kremlin government in Georgia after the war of 2008, but several years have passed, and we see this government. We see Bidzina Ivanishvili now, who doesn't want anymore to move in the direction of European Union and NATO. Mm-hmm. He plays some games showing he's not so close ally of Putin, he's fully independent, but we understand how far dependent and how closely connected to Kremlin he is. So this scenario would be pushed by Putin anyway, and he would never be silent. He would never stop his efforts on the Ukrainian direction, before he reaches his goal. And because Putin, one of the key elements of Putin thinking is considering the time as a key resource, which of course he has in abundance. He has no constituents, or he has no real democratic elections. He has no responsibility toward constituents. So he can wait for many, many years, unlike democratic leaders who are responsible before their constituents, and in such way don't have such resource of time in abundance like Putin.
So basically, Georgian scenario is in Putin's head. Probably a clip can be used in Ukraine.
Applied.
Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Sure, yeah. Putin is going to persuade, for instance, let's imagine we have a full-scale armistice, full-scale ceasefire tomorrow. The next day, Putin will launch his propaganda campaign, trying to persuade Ukrainian people that the only guarantor, long-term guarantor of Ukrainian security could be the source of war itself, namely Russia and himself, Putin. No one but himself could guarantee the peace for the country so much devastated and exhausted by this dreadful war of the 3 years and a half. And second position of Putin, his second thesis would be that the West, first and foremost Europe, European Union, have deceived Ukraine and Ukrainian people by their unrealistic, from the very beginning, promises to get Ukraine onto European Union and NATO. Putin would try to persuade Ukraine that his obligations to Ukraine would be firm, despite, let's see what happening in Georgia for the past 2-3 years. Georgia is fully declining from Euro-Atlantic and European integration and implementing the worst practices and technologies of the political system of Russia. Georgia, as we see it, moving rapidly enough toward full-scale authoritarianism, the way Russia has undergone under Putin's. Something would be offered for Ukraine as the only way to long-term stable peace, is the only guarantee of this peace, which Europe cannot guarantee, because Europe cannot, as Putin sees it, and as Putin is going to show it now, Europe cannot cope with Russian drones, even, yes, because Europe has never been preparing itself for the big war, and in such way could never guarantee the Ukrainian security, like NATO, which now being without this, being deprived of this leading role of the US, is not the same NATO as 15-20 years ago. It's rather a weak NATO which doesn't know what to do, even with those Russian drones entering this the aerospace of NATO countries, and NATO countries do nothing in response.
Yeah, absolutely. I just found a very nice piece of Chrystia Freeland. She's a Canadian politician with Ukrainian roots, and she's a Canadian envoy.
No, I'm very sorry for interrupting you. Now she's appointed, she would be in charge for
rebuilding
reconstruction
Ukraine. Reconstruction,
Yeah.
rebuilding. Yes. So I was just reading her article at Financial Times where she was saying, just let me find it, that she argues that for too long allies have been treated Ukraine only as a victim, noble but inevitably doomed without outside help. The narrative, she says, was convenient for the West because it put Europe and America at the center of the story, but it ignored Ukraine's own strength, innovations, and resilience. Do you see also in that way that Europe should not see us as a victim only?
Ukraine is not a victim. I think the philosophy of victim, the ideological, psychology of victim is very harmful, regardless if it concerns the human being, corporation, or country. Because victim is someone who decided not to fight and sees its only way to capitalize on the status of victim itself. Ukraine has never been a victim. Ukraine was an object of an aggression, but not victim, because Ukraine is fighting for 3 years and a half against a strong enemy, stronger than Ukraine itself. And the war started, and though Ukraine was to a certain extent unprepared for such a large-scale intervention of Russian forces, the war started 3 years and a half ago without any full-scale Western assistance, especially military one. The Western assistance has come only when America and Europe have seen with their own eyes that Ukraine is fighting. Ukraine is by no means going to surrender. And while the country that is not going to surrender cannot be considered as a victim, of course. And Europe cannot cease to consider itself as a secondary part of America's central world. Europe should now face as a necessity because of the historical process itself, not because of Donald Trump. President Trump reflects the logic of this historical process, but has not created it by himself. If not Trump, maybe the way of the humanity would be in this a little bit more slowly, but in the same direction, to non-centered world, network world. And in this way, Europe should reinvent its identity, get revised some regulations, come to the way of deregulation of the economy, decreasing of the role of Euro bureaucracy, which has crossed any red lines of necessity of this Euro bureaucracy. And of course, consider Ukraine, even if not the full-scale member of European Union, because in my opinion, the enlargement of the EU would be delayed for the past years, because the EU has no more economical resources for such enlargement, even if we do not forget for a little while about contradictions between different European countries onto the questions of enlargement. For instance, Greece is fully against Albania membership, Croatia against Serbia membership, and of course not just Hungary and Slovakia, but France itself, because the interest of its farmers is against for the full-scale Ukraine membership. But nonetheless, Ukraine was the first barrier against totalitarian aggression, which was directed against Europe and its values on the whole. Not just Europe as a territory, not just Europe as economical or political union, but Europe as a values, as a tradition. It was aggression about those values, and Ukraine should be considered as a key partner in that, not victim, in opposing this and fighting against this existential aggression.
Thank you. Thank you for clarifying this. Stanislav, thank you so much for your answers, for your time, for me, and to our audience. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for you inviting me entirely at your disposal anytime. Thank you.